The 1904 Olympic Marathon might be the strangest in Olympic history. The winner was given poison during the race, one runner was chased off course by wild dogs, and another runner was a Cuban mailman who showed up after gambling away all of his travel money. And that is just the beginning. The 1904 Olympics were held in St. Louis, Missouri, making it the first time that the United States would host the Games. But before the marathon had even started, there was already some trouble. Most of the athletes who were invited didn't even show up. For international competitors, it was expensive to travel across the ocean by ship and then travel hundreds of miles inland by train to get to St. Louis. In the end, 630 athletes competed, representing 12 different countries. Of those 630, 523 of them were American. So, a very international event. The runners in this marathon were an odd group. There were several experienced runners, including Boston Marathon winners who were going to compete, but there were also some people who had had a little less experience, including the entire Greek team, who had never ran a marathon in their entire lives. Another unusual entrant was Fred Lors, a bricklayer who won a chance to compete after winning an amateur race. Even more unusual still were the two competitors from Africa, who just so happened to be in St. Louis at the time as part of the World's Fair, and just entered the race on a whim. But the strangest competitor by far was Felix Carvajal, a Cuban mailman. Felix dreamed of running the Olympics, and he began to beg people along his mail route for money so that he could raise funds to travel to America. Surprisingly, this worked, and he gathered enough money to make the trip. On his way to St. Louis, he traveled through New Orleans, where he promptly gambled away all of his funds. Undeterred, because apparently this man could not be stopped by logic, he hitchhiked and walked the rest of the way to St. Louis. The day of the race arrived, and the air was sweltering and the humidity suffocating as temperatures climbed over 90 degrees. The runners were quite a sight, with one of the African athletes being completely barefoot and Felix showing up to the starting line in full dress clothes. Eventually, Felix came to his senses and cut his pants at the knee to create a pair of makeshift shorts. Then, the runners lined up, the starting pistol fired, and they were off. The route was almost 25 miles long and wildly unconventional. The route would take them up and down hills, through busy intersections, and on dirt country roads. The dust became a problem almost immediately. Support vehicles rode in front of the racers, kicking up dirt and spewing exhaust into the runners' faces. As they gasped for air, dust coated their lungs, making the already oppressive heat and humidity even worse. The dust may not have been such a problem if the athletes had actually had access to water, but along the 25-mile route, there was only one water station. One. For 25 miles. And this wasn't just some major oversight by the organizers, it was intentional. The event's organizer, James E. Sullivan, wanted to test the effects of dehydration on athletes, believing that it would make them perform better. Naturally, this had the exact opposite effect. As the race went on, the conditions only got worse, and as dehydration set in, the runners fell far below their normal pace. The first runner to drop out was a former Boston Marathon winner who began uncontrollably vomiting around the 10-mile mark. Soon after, another Boston Marathon winner collapsed while climbing one of the many hills and had to leave the race as well. So, we're already off to a fantastic start here. Despite other racers dropping like flies, our Cuban friend seemed to be doing pretty well. He even stopped to chat with some spectators along busy parts of the route. At one point, he flagged down a passing car and asked the driver if he could have one of the peaches that he was eating. After being turned down, Felix simply reached in, stole the peach, and continued down the road. According to some dubious sources, Felix even stopped in an apple orchard and picked a few apples to eat, which turned out to be rotten, and took a nap under one of the trees. And, this may or may not be true, but considering how absurd the completely true parts of this race are, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this was also accurate. While Felix seemed to be having a grand old time, the other runners were nowhere near as lucky. One runner nearly died after he started coughing up blood and was found unconscious in a ditch. He was rushed to the hospital where the doctors discovered that the dust had badly damaged his lungs and esophagus. Despite his injuries, he recovered and was eventually able to continue his running career. With everything going on, you may be wondering how the African runners were doing, and they were holding up pretty well actually, even considering one of them had been chased a mile off course by wild dogs, because apparently the dust, heat, and dehydration weren't enough to begin with. Meanwhile, Fred Lors, the bricklayer, had taken the lead, but by mile 9 he began to cramp and dropped out of the race. He caught a ride back to the stadium, but when the car broke down before reaching its destination, he just ran the rest of the way there. When Lors entered the stadium, the crowd erupted. The energy was infectious, and apparently the cheers were too much to resist, because instead of admitting that he had dropped out of the race, Lors just ran across the finish line. He was just about to be awarded the gold medal when a spectator shouted out that Lors had cheated by hitching a ride. The cheers turned to boos, and Lors claimed that it had all been a joke, and he had never intended on accepting the win or the gold medal, because we're all familiar with the classic prank of cheating to become an Olympic champion, right? Officials revoked his victory, and he was banned for life, although this ban was eventually rescinded. When another leading runner, Thomas Hicks, found out about Lors' supposed win, he begged his handlers to let him quit. He desperately needed water and rest, but his handlers just sponged out his mouth with warm water instead. To keep him moving, they also gave him a mixture of raw eggs and strychnine. Strychnine is a highly toxic substance that was believed at the time to be a performance enhancer. It was also commonly used in rat poison. Rat poison. The idea was that the muscle spasms it induced would help an athlete perform better. At the time, performance-enhancing drugs were not banned in the Olympics, which, in hindsight, seems like a rule they should have gotten to a little bit earlier. As he ran, Hicks' condition worsened, but when he learned of Lors' disqualification, he got a second wind. So, naturally, his handlers did the only reasonable thing. They gave him a second dose of eggs and strychnine, but this time with some brandy to wash it down. Because apparently, if poison is not working, then the answer is more poison. Hicks continued to soldier on, with the heat, humidity, dust, and strychnine making him literally delusional. By the time he entered the stadium, he could hardly walk and had to be physically held up by his handlers. Physical assistance like this was also not banned at the time in the Olympics. He was practically carried across the finish line and immediately collapsed. It took 4 doctors about an hour to help him regain consciousness. Hicks was awarded the gold medal, and despite having the slowest winning time in Olympic history, I think he did pretty well, all things considered. After the ordeal, he retired from running marathons, which was probably less of a career decision, more of survival instinct at that point. The United States went on to take second and third place as well, with Felix Carvajal finishing in 4th, and the African runners finishing in 9th and 12th, respectively. The 1904 marathon was supposed to be a test of endurance. Instead, it went down as one of the worst planned and executed events in Olympic history. And yet, out of all that chaos, Thomas Hicks still walked away with gold. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.